A few hours after my mom's funeral, my dad married his mistress and moved her new family into the house I had inherited. He told me, "From now on, she'll take over your mom's bakery business." When I confronted him, he snapped, "This house and bakery are mine now. You can stay here until our honeymoon trip." I couldn't help but laugh because, just days earlier, my name is Emma Collins, and I'm 25 years old. Recently, I graduated from the University of California with a degree in fine arts. Life as a fresh graduate comes with its challenges, but my story is more than just about navigating adulthood. It's about a family legacy, betrayal, and finding strength in the face of adversity. Growing up, my mother, Olivia Collins, was the cornerstone of my world. A talented chef and a business owner, she wasn't just an incredible cook, but also a meticulous planner. She built her life with purpose, ensuring that I always had a safety net even before her cancer diagnosis. She had secured her future and mine. Among her most prized possessions was the family bakery she had built from scratch, pouring her heart and soul into its success. When she passed away 4 years ago, she left the business to me, ensuring I'd have something to hold on to, a part of her that would always remain. "Emma, this bakery is more than just a business," she would say. "It's our home, our roots. You'll always have a place to call yours." Even while battling cancer, her focus remained on preparing me for a future without her. She made sure I understood every detail of the business, from managing staff to dealing with suppliers. Her foresight was her way of showing love, and I carry that with me every day. Life wasn't always simple though. My parents' marriage lasted 10 years before everything fell apart. I was just a child when my father, Jack Collins, decided to leave us for someone else. There were no dramatic fights or courtroom battles, just quiet goodbyes. He moved on quickly, marrying Madison, a younger woman who seemed to step into the role of wife and mother without hesitation. Their daughter, Abigail, came shortly after, and though I visited occasionally, I never felt like I truly belonged in their new family. Madison was always polite but distant, the kind of stepmother who made you feel like a guest rather than part of the household. "Emma, would you like to stay for dinner?" she'd ask, her tone suggesting she hoped I'd say no. Meanwhile, Dad worked long hours claiming he needed to provide for his family, a category that seemed to exclude me more often than not. Abigail, my half-sister, was 10 years younger and the apple of their eye. I'd see Madison fuss over her, braiding her hair, or applauding her every little accomplishment. It was hard not to feel like an outsider. Despite all this, my relationship with my father remained cordial, though distant. He paid for my college education in a lump sum, perhaps out of guilt or obligation. It was his way of staying involved without actually being present. I accepted it without question because, at the time, I thought it was the best I could hope for. Little did I know that my mother's thoughtful plans and my father's hidden motives would set the stage for a storm I never saw coming. Losing my mother was the hardest thing I've ever faced. Olivia Collins wasn't just my mom. She was my anchor, my cheerleader, and the person who made me feel like I could take on the world. When she passed away from cancer 4 years ago, just weeks before I was supposed to leave for college, my world crumbled. The grief was overwhelming. It felt like a piece of me was missing. For a long time, I struggled to even get out of bed. During those first few weeks, I was numb, barely able to process the fact that she was gone. That's when my father, Jack Collins, stepped in, offering help in a way I hadn't expected. He, along with Madison and Abigail, temporarily moved into the house to support me. At the time, I was too overwhelmed by my loss to question it. I was just grateful for the presence of people, even if our relationship had always been strained. "We are here for you, Emma," my dad said, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. Madison nodded in agreement, her face carefully arranged to look sympathetic. Even Abigail, my half-sister, seemed to go out of her way to be kind, though her curious eyes wandered through the house, taking in every corner like it was a museum. At first, their presence brought some relief. Madison took charge of organizing meals and keeping the house running, while Dad helped with the overwhelming paperwork that comes with losing a loved one. Abigail would sit with me chatting about school and her friends, offering small distractions from the crushing weight of my grief. It felt strange, but in those moments, almost comforting. As summer drew to a close and my college start date approached, I faced a difficult decision. What to do with the house? Selling it was unthinkable. It was my mother's legacy, the place she'd worked so hard to secure for us, but leaving it empty for 4 years didn't seem like a smart option either. That's when Dad came to me with a proposal. "Emma," he said one morning over coffee, "why don't we stay here while you're at school? We'll cover all the bills, maintain the place, and you won't have to worry about a thing." Madison, flipping pancakes at the stove, chimed in, "It would be good for everyone. Abigail loves her school here, and the house will be in great hands." At the time, it seemed like a practical solution. I agreed, grateful for the offer, and left for college with a sense that my mother's house and her memory would be cared for. College was a whirlwind of classes, assignments, and late-night study sessions, but coming home during breaks always felt like stepping into a different world. My visits were a comforting reminder of home, and over time, I started to notice something unexpected. The family dynamic at my mother's house was changing. When I came home from my first break, Madison greeted me with a warm smile and a home-cooked meal. "Welcome back, Emma. I made lasagna, your favorite," she said, setting the table as if she'd always known my preferences. Abigail, my half-sister, couldn't wait to drag me to her room to show off her latest artwork. "Look, Emma, do you think I should add more blue here?" she'd asked, her enthusiasm infectious. For the first time, she treated me like a sister rather than the distant relative who occasionally visited. As the years passed, these visits became more than just a chance to recharge. They started to feel like I was part of something bigger. During Christmas breaks, we'd decorate the tree together, arguing playfully over ornaments. "Tinsel is so tacky," Madison would declare. Well, I'd laugh and insist it was classic. Dad would lift Abigail to place the star on top, grinning as if this was the family he'd always envisioned. Those moments felt warm and genuine, almost like we were truly a family. Summer breaks were longer and even more relaxed. Abigail and I would spend lazy afternoons at the community pool or binge-watch movies while eating popcorn. Madison surprised me by inviting me to her book club, where we bonded over dissecting romance novels and laughed at the plot twists. "Emma's insights are spot on," Madison told her friends one evening, making me feel included in a way I hadn't expected. Even Dad seemed to take a step back from his usual reserved demeanor. He'd join us for dinners and ask about my classes, genuinely interested in my life. "Your mom would be so proud of you," he said one evening, his voice thick with emotion. It was moments like these that made me feel like I wasn't just a visitor. I was part of the family. Over time, I began to see Madison and Abigail in a different light. Madison, who once seemed cold and distant, became almost maternal, always asking about my life and making sure I felt at home. Abigail's youthful full energy and constant chatter filled the house with life, and her habit of seeking my advice made me feel like an older sister for the first time. The house too seemed to change with each visit. Small touches of Madison's influence appeared. A new set of curtains, a carefully arranged centerpiece on the dining table. But they were tasteful, blending with the warmth my mom had cultivated. It felt like we were all building something together, something that honored the past while embracing the present. By the time I graduated, I genuinely believed we had created a strange but functional family dynamic. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I never imagined how fragile it all was, how quickly the foundation we built could crack under the weight of hidden truths. Graduating from college felt like the start of a new chapter in my life. After 4 years of hard work, late-night study sessions, and dreaming about my future, I finally had my degree in hand. I'd landed a job at a local firm back in my hometown, and the thought of returning to the house I'd grown up in filled me with a sense of comfort and excitement. My mother's house, my house, was waiting for me. A place where I could finally settle down and start building my career. The June afternoon I arrived back home was bright and warm, the kind of day that fills you with optimism. As the taxi pulled up to the driveway, I smiled at the familiar side of the house. The garden looked well maintained, though the roses my mom had planted seemed slightly different from how she tended them. The house felt the same, yet subtly altered by the small changes Madison had made over the years: new curtains, a different pink color on the shutters. It all looked welcoming, and I couldn't wait to step inside and claim my room once again. Dragging my suitcases up the front walk, I reached for my keys, eager to walk into the home that had always been a safe haven for me. But when I slid the key into the lock, it wouldn't turn. Frowning, I tried again, jiggling the key slightly. Confused, I muttered to myself, "What the hell?" and knocked loudly on the door. Surely, it was just a mistake. A new lock installed without anyone thinking to send me a spare key. After a moment, the door opened, and Madison stood there. Her expression shifted from surprise to discomfort in an instant. She was wearing an apron dusted with flour as if she'd been baking. "Emma," she said, her voice hesitant. "What are you doing here?" I wheeled my suitcase into the entryway, ignoring the awkwardness in her tone. "What do you mean?" "I live here," I replied, scanning the living room, which looked subtly different from how I'd left it. New furniture arrangements. A different rug. Why were the locks changed? Before Madison could answer, Dad appeared from the living room, his face pale and movements stiff. Abigail trailed behind him, looking nervous, but staying silent. "Emma," Dad began, rubbing the back of his neck, a telltale sign he was uncomfortable. "Let's talk in the office for a minute." Alarm bells started ringing in my head as I followed him to the small office that used to belong to my mom. The walls were still lined with her books and certificates, but the air felt heavy, as if the room itself knew what was coming. Dad closed the door behind us and turned to face me, his hands shaking slightly. "Emma," he started, his voice low. "There's something I need to tell you." He paused, and I could see the weight of his words pressing down on him. "Madison. Madison thinks this house belongs to me." I stared at him uncomprehending. "What are you talking about? Mom left this house to me. It's in her will." He nodded, avoiding my eyes. "I know that. But when we moved in, I told Madison it was mine, that I'd given it to your mom out of kindness after the divorce, and that when she passed, it came back to me." The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. "You lied to her for 4 years. You let her believe this was your house, and now you're telling me that she doesn't even know it's mine." Dad's shoulders slumped. "I didn't think it would matter. You were at college, and we needed a place to stay. I thought it would be temporary." "Temporary? This is my house, Dad, Mom's house, and you're telling me you've been living here, letting Madison act like it's hers while you lied to her and to me." "I was going to tell her the truth," he said weakly, but his words rang hollow. "Just give me some time to figure out how to handle this." I shook my head, furious. "You've already had 4 years, Dad." At that moment, Madison knocked on the door. Her voice was sharp. "Is everything okay in there?" The tension was suffocating. But one thing was clear. I wasn't going to let them continue this charade. The first few days back in the house were awkward, but I tried to convince myself that things would get better. After the confrontation with my father, I chose to keep quiet for the time being, hoping he would resolve the situation as promised. But the atmosphere in the house shifted almost immediately, and Madison's behavior quickly took a turn for the worse. It started with small things, comments that sounded polite on the surface or laced with subtle jabs. "Emma, I reorganized the pantry for efficiency. You probably didn't notice since you've been so busy with college," she'd say, smiling too sweetly. Then there were the accidents. One morning, I found my favorite blouse in the laundry ruined with bright pink streaks. "Oh, dear," Madison exclaimed when I confronted her, her tone dripping with mock concern. "I must have mixed up the laundry baskets. These things happen when a house gets too crowded." Abigail, who had once been eager to spend time with me, now seemed distant and aloof. She rolled her eyes whenever I entered the room and started referring to me as that girl during her loud phone conversations with friends. "Mom says it's weird you're still here." I overheard her whispering one evening. The words stung more than I expected. Madison's passive-aggressive jab soon turned into outright hostility. One evening, as I poured myself a cup of coffee, she cornered me in the kitchen, arms crossed and her expression icy. "Emma, have you thought about getting your own place?" she asked, her tone casual, but her words pointed. "You're starting a new job soon. It's time to think about living independently. You're a grown woman after all." I clenched the mug in my hands, forcing myself to stay calm. "Actually, I've talked to Dad about staying here for a while. He's fine with it." Her lips pressed into a thin line and for a moment, I thought she might argue. Instead, she turned and left the kitchen without another word. But her actions spoke louder than anything she could have said. The next morning, I woke up to find the living room rearranged. My mother's favorite vase was moved to a dusty corner shelf. "It didn't match the new aesthetic," Madison said when I confronted her. My frustration grew, but I tried to hold my tongue, knowing any argument would only make things worse. The tension in the house was unbearable. Madison made it clear I wasn't welcome and Abigail followed her lead, treating me with disdain. Even Dad, who had always been my safety net, seemed distant. He avoided eye contact and often left the house early in the morning claiming work obligations. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. Family dinners became a battlefield of subtle digs and uncomfortable silences. Madison would cook just enough food for 3 people, then faint surprise when I joined them at the table. "Oh, I didn't think you'd be here for dinner," she'd say, her tone light, but her eyes cold. Abigail giggled at her mother's remarks, and Dad would sit quietly, avoiding any confrontation. As the days passed, the isolation began to wear on me. I found myself retreating to my room more often, avoiding the hostility that seemed to follow me around the house. But even there, I couldn't escape the suffocating sense of betrayal. This wasn't just about Madison anymore. It was about my father, the man who had stood by silently as his wife chipped away at my sense of belonging. I tried to focus on my new job and reconnecting with old friends to distract myself, but the weight of the tension at home lingered. Each day, the cracks in our fragile family dynamic grew deeper and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pushed out of my own life. Saturday morning started unusually quiet. No sounds of Madison's weekend baking in the kitchen, no music blasting from Abigail's room, and no faint murmurs of the TV where Dad usually watched sports. The silence was eerie, like the house itself was holding its breath. I slipped out of bed and padded downstairs, calling out, "Hello, Madison, Dad," but there was no response. The kitchen was spotless, not just clean, but unused since the night before. The living room looked untouched, with throw pillows perfectly arranged on the couch. Even the usual clutter by the entryway, Abigail's shoes, Madison's handbag was gone. A quick glance outside confirmed it. Dad's car wasn't in the driveway. I checked my phone expecting a note or text explaining their absence, but there was nothing. Confused, I dialed Dad's number. It went straight to voicemail. Frowning, I tried a few more times before reluctantly calling Madison. She picked up on the fourth ring, her voice sharp and impatient. "What do you want, Emma?" she snapped. The sound of waves and tropical music laid faintly in the background. "I just wanted to know where everyone is," I said, caught off guard by her tone. I woke up and the house was empty. She laughed, but it wasn't the warm kind of laugh. It was mean, cutting. "Oh, didn't we tell you? We're in the Maldives, first-class flights, luxury resort, the works." Her voice dripped with mockery. "We didn't mention it because, frankly, we didn't want you tagging along and expecting us to pay for you." "What?" I stammered, disbelief mixing with anger. "Madison, what are you talking about? You left without saying anything." "Save it," she interrupted coldly. "I'm done with this whole situation. You're nothing but a freeloader living in our house, mooching off us like you own the place. Your father might tolerate it, but I won't. Do you know how embarrassing it is to have a grown woman squatting in her home?" Her words hit like a slap, but she wasn't finished. "When we get back, I want you gone. Pack your things and leave, Emma, and don't think you can guilt your father into letting you stay. He agrees with me. He's just too spineless to tell you himself. We've already blocked your number. Have a nice life." The line went dead before I could respond. For a moment, I just stood there, the phone trembling in my hand. Her venomous words echoed in my mind, and the weight of the betrayal hit me like a tidal wave. But then something inside me shifted. The sadness and disbelief gave way to anger. White-hot, focused anger. This was my house, my mother's house, and I was done playing nice. I spent the rest of the day packing their belongings with a determination I didn't know I had. Madison's expensive clothes, Abigail's school supplies, Dad's golf clubs, it all went into boxes and suitcases. I stacked them neatly in the garage, making sure not a single trace of them remained in the house. Every move felt cathartic, like I was reclaiming a piece of myself with each item I packed away. By evening, I had called a locksmith. "Can you change the locks immediately?" I asked, my voice firm. He arrived within the hour, replacing every lock in the house while I stood by, clutching the new keys like a lifeline. It cost a small fortune, but I didn't care. As I closed the door behind him, I felt a strange sense of relief. This was my house again, and no one was going to take it from me. Friday evening, I pulled into the driveway after a long day at work and immediately spotted their car. They were back. Madison, Dad, and Abigail stood near the front steps surrounded by their suitcases and boxes from the garage. Madison's face was flushed with fury, her hands gesturing wildly as she spoke to Dad. Abigail hung back scowling while Dad wore his usual look of quiet discomfort. As soon as I stepped out of my car, Madison's voice erupted. "How dare you change the locks?" she shouted, storming toward me. "This is our house. You have no right to lock us out." I ignored her ranting, walking calmly past them toward the front door. Madison followed close behind, her voice rising with every step. "This is breaking and entering. We're calling the police. You think you can just throw us out like we're nothing?" I stopped at the door, turned, and faced her. Something inside me felt calm, steady, even as her words spat like venom. "No, Madison," I said firmly, "this isn't your house. It never was. This house belongs to me. My mother left it to me in her will. The only reason you've been living here is because I allowed it, and now I'm done." Her face twisted in disbelief, and she turned to Dad who stood frozen near the car. "Jack, tell her she's lying. Tell her this is our house," she demanded, her voice shrill. Dad looked like he wanted to melt into the pavement. He avoided my gaze as he shuffled uncomfortably, finally mumbling, "She's telling the truth." Madison's fury boiled over. "You lied to me," she shrieked, glaring at him. "You let me think this was your house, that you were doing me a favor by letting her stay. What else haven't you told me?" Her attention snapped back to me, her expression a mix of anger and desperation. "Emma, sweetheart," she began, her tone suddenly soft and saccharine. "We've had so many good times here. Holiday dinners, book club nights. This is a family home. Surely, we can work something out." "No," I said, cutting her off. "We can't. Your things are in the garage. Take them and leave." Madison's mask cracked, her tone turning venomous again. "You ungrateful little. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? You'd throw your own family out on the streets." "You've never treated me like family," I shot back, my voice calm but firm. "And don't pretend this is about loyalty. You tried to steal my house, Madison. My mother's house." Dad finally stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Emma, please, I know I've made mistakes, but we're family. We can figure this out. Just let us stay a little longer." I shook my head, meeting his pleading eyes with steel. "No, Dad, you lied to her and you lied to me. You let her erase every trace of Mom from this house while you stood by and said nothing. I won't let you keep doing this. Madison tried one last time, her voice rising with desperation. You can't do this. We'll fight you on this, Emma. I opened the door and stepped inside, turning to face them one last time. You're welcome to try, I said simply, closing the door firmly behind me. Through the window, I watched them argue as they loaded the last of their belongings into the car. Madison screamed, Abigail cried, and Dad just looked defeated as the car pulled away. A heavy weight lifted from my chest. The house was mine again. Truly mine. In the days following their departure, the house felt eerily quiet, but the silence brought a surprising sense of peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking on eggshells or bracing for Madison's passive-aggressive remarks. The space was mine again, and with it came a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. This was no longer just my mother's house. It was my sanctuary, my chance to start fresh. Cutting ties with my father and his family wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Dad tried to reach out a few times, calling from new numbers and leaving voicemails full of apologies and promises to fix things. I didn't answer. His words felt hollow after everything he'd allowed to happen. I love you, Emma, he said in one message. I was just trying to keep the peace. But peace built on lies isn't peace at all, and I wasn't willing to compromise my dignity for his comfort anymore. Madison didn't bother trying to reach me. She'd made her feelings clear. Abigail's silence stung more than I expected, but I reminded myself that she was still young, caught in the crossfire of her parents' decisions. Even so, I knew it was better to let go of the toxic ties that had weighed me down for so long. With them gone, I turned my focus to rebuilding my life. The first step was reclaiming the house, not just physically, but emotionally. I rearranged the furniture back to the way my mom had it, repainting the walls in soft, warm tones that reminded me of her. I replanted the rose bushes in the garden, choosing the same color she had loved. Each small change felt like a step toward honoring her memory while making the space my own. Work became another anchor for me. My job at Marshall & Brooks Financial was challenging but fulfilling, and I threw myself into it with everything I had. My colleagues became friends, and for the first time, I started to feel like I was part of a community. Harper from the risk assessment team became a close confidant, and our lunch breaks were filled with laughter and brainstorming about future plans. But the most meaningful project was restoring my mother's bakery, which had been closed since her passing. It took months of planning and late nights, but eventually, the doors reopened. The first time I stepped behind a counter, the smell of fresh bread and pastries filling the air, I felt a surge of pride and connection to her. The bakery wasn't just a business, it was her legacy. And now it was mine to carry forward. In the quiet moments, I often thought about everything that had happened. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the loss of people I had once called family, but I didn't dwell on it with bitterness. Instead, I saw it as a chapter in my story, one that taught me the importance of boundaries, self-respect, and the power of starting over. Healing isn't linear and it isn't easy, but standing in my mother's house surrounded by the life I was building, I felt something I hadn't in years: hope. My mother had always believed in planning for the future, and now I understood why. She had given me the tools to stand on my own even when the people I trusted the most let me down. As I looked out at the garden, the roses blooming in the evening light, I knew I was ready to move forward. This house, this life, it was mine, and I would build it into something beautiful for her, for me, and for the future she always wanted me to have.